avoidance, and we're very excited to be talking about these key issues in the world economy. So we are joined with today by some rock stars of the tax world. Gurría, the head of the OECD, which has just put forward some really interesting, amazing work on the base erosion and profit sharing, known as BEPS plan.
Profit shifting.
Not
profit sharing.
Profit sharing, yeah. And that's later. But was it 78 countries who signed on? How many countries were part of the BEPS?
Now we're at 100.
Now 100, so pretty amazing to get that many nations to agree together on tax. Next to him, probably needs no introduction to this room, Minister Paschal Donohoe of Ireland, certainly a celeb in this tax world. Mark Pieth next to him, who's here representing chair of the board of the Basel Institute of Governance, but is certainly well known in the tax world for calling out a lot of tax cheaters over the years. And last but not least, Bastian Obermayer, who's one of the lead reporters from the Paradise Papers and the Panama Papers, and just in the last few weeks has broken major news on a Nike case here in Europe that we'll want to get some updates on. So, to kick it off, I thought we'd talk a little bit. It's a really interesting time to be having this panel. We're a year into the new US tax system that's really shaken up the world of global tax. We've had the Paradise and the Panama Papers that have opened a lot of our eyes to just how much tax avoidance is going on in the world and how sophisticated the schemes are. And of course the OECD has made some unprecedented moves to try to bring the global community together to end the double Dutch and the double Irish and some of these other tax schemes that have been pretty prevalent in the last few years. So, but I wanted to start the panel today responding to Chancellor Merkel yesterday. She took the stage at Davos and she called again for an international minimum tax for corporations. So the idea that a company wouldn't be able to shift their profits from one country to another, that they would be assessed some sort of minimum tax rate, and then those profits would, or tax revenues would be divvied up. Minister Donohoe, you've come out against this. Why are you opposed to it?
Ireland, and I as Minister for Finance for Ireland, are very supportive of all of the changes that need to take place through the work of the OECD, through collaboration within the European Union, to ensure that we have an international tax system that is fit for purpose, and Ireland has played its part in it. To answer your question, Heather, in relation to why we're not supportive of minimum effective tax rates across the world, the reason why we believe that is twofold. We believe that countries and their ability to set their tax rate is a very, very important part of their national sovereignty. And we believe, in particular, if you are a small country, we believe that competitiveness is not just an opportunity for bigger countries, that smaller countries can play a role in looking at how they can be competitive too. And tax and competitive taxation is an element of that. And for those reasons, we, along with some other countries in the European Union, have always been very cautious or sceptical about any proposals for minimum effective taxation.
We'll return to that in a minute, but why don't we give some others a chance to weigh in. Angel, is this a viable path, what Chancellor Merkel is proposing? Is this idea of a minimum tax on corporations?
Everything is in the context. This is a proposal that Germany made in the context of the discussion about taxing digital. It didn't come out of the blue simply, let us say. Now, why do I say this? Because, well, first of all, it was considered completely impossible to agree on anything, and you know, Ireland knows this very well. The Nordic countries know very well. The French were pushing to have a Euro directive, European directive, starting on the 1st of January 2019. There was no agreement on that, and then it won't. But there you have Italy. You have Spain that has put some kind of tax on that. Frankly, it's not yet on because they haven't approved the budget in Spain, but that's for political reasons, not because they're of the problem of the tax. The UK have put on a tax of sorts in a way, but there isn't today an agreement on how to go about it, although there is much more progress than we've ever made in a relatively short period of time. Why? Because among other things, a big thing changed in the meantime, which was the US tax reform. And that opened many possibilities. Now we're talking about the allocation of taxing rights as a principle, which is fundamental because now we are saying, okay, breakdown, country by country breakdown in terms of where your profits come from, and therefore, that you tax where the profits are generated. Number two, there is the UK approach, which is user contribution, which is basically what is the value, how much does a company receive from the fact that they're getting all your information and my information, your information, and then they package it and they sell the profiles, etc. And last but not least, there's this question of the minimum tax. Now, the question with the minimum tax does not refer only to digital taxation. It basically is a concept that would apply across the board. And that is why we were discussing digital taxation. Suddenly they came out with a minimum tax which applies across the board, maybe much more complicated to apply, etc. But people say, well, if it's set low enough, etc., it can clear. Now, let me just add to what the Irish minister, no, on the contrary. The question is, he says, every country has to have the sovereignty to fix the taxes. And I totally agree. The OECD has never said that there is a tax which everybody should adopt or adapt to. What we have always said is, you can have any level of tax you want as long as you treat everybody the same. What we were against were the honeymoon deals, the sweetheart deals that we had, where well, you were 12.5, and then somebody was getting 2.5, and then we just found out the Apple case 0.05, not bad, eh? It's a good low tax rate. But then, so there you have a situation where you say the system is being abused, the system is being gamed, and you basically do not want that either. You want companies to pay their fair share. Now, individuals are now in a nowhere-to-hide situation. Countries are now exchanging information on the individuals, on the financial accounts of individuals, and they are making this because they committed to it and they approved it in the law and they ratified, etc. And I would say, double Irish, it doesn't exist anymore. They dismantled it. This is not known. You could not happen again what happened with the question of Apple. This could not be repeated. This is of the past. This is of 10 years ago, okay? It doesn't exist anymore. And the double Dutch was, by the way, they followed the Irish, huh? And then the double UK and the double Mac and everything double, all these things were off the books. Made a lot of progress there. But on the question of the minimum tax, the issue is it was in the context of this digital taxation, which still has until 2020 to put the final roadmap.
Okay. All right. Mark, let me kick it to you and get you to weigh in on this.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. We're very deep into solutions already. And I think it's rightly you're addressing transparency as one of the issues, exchange of information. You're also already talking about some way of harmonization. I know you don't want to go all the way yet, but we're tiptoeing towards the issues. For me, the whole topic has a different dimension, and maybe with what the OECD is doing, we tend to think we don't have to go into that anymore because it's already accepted that we need to do something about it. What I'm talking about is, if you go back to the origin of the problem, harmful tax competition, I would go very far back and look at the resource curse. For me, that's where it all starts, that you actually have commodity-rich countries and a population that is starving at the same time. And you have elites that sell off the goods of the country and, well, multinational companies who buy those mining rights, for instance. For me, that's one angle, one aspect. The other aspect is that the same companies then shift their profits out of the country where they leave the social and ecological waste and problems. And I think that just has to be said before we turn to the question, what we do about it. That's, for me, the wider framework, because it hits developing countries above all. I agree that Europe in itself also has a problem, because you want to run your social state, and then it's a bit of a problem. If the people run off, if your crown jewels go to Malta, if Lufthansa pays their taxes in Malta, I know that then Mrs. Merkel has a problem. But for me, the whole thing starts at a different point, and I think one has to understand what the OECD is achieving actually here, has to go back to the element of resource curves.
But obviously the Chancellor Merkel is calling for something beyond what the OECD did with the BEPS, the first BEPS.
It's good if this is done, first of all, frankly.
Minister.
Yeah, so I don't think two things get enough recognition at the moment. The first thing I don't think is getting enough recognition is the degree to which the global landscape and corporate taxation has changed over the last number of years and how it will change further. The combination of the BEPS process that was enabled by Angel and all of his team, which has changed the template for corporate taxation all over the world. If you combine that with the impact of US tax reform, which has made very significant changes, in particular regarding creating an incentive for the repatriation of earnings and changes in relation to minimum effective tax rates for American companies. I think that global change doesn't get the recognition that it needs, and it's great to hear Mark there acknowledge it. I think the other thing that doesn't get recognition, and I appreciate Angel calling this out, is the progress that Ireland-like countries are making in this agenda. I mean, we are eliminating the double Irish from our tax code. For example, the concept that Mark referred to there in relation to exchange of information and transparency, we've now embedded that into our tax code. Changes that we have made in relation to mandatory disclosure of information, that's in our tax code now. And what finance ministers like me are trying to do is we're trying to ensure, firstly, that we have tax codes that are competitive, but secondly, that they do meet the new standards that are a consequence of the global debate that is underway, that has been inspired by the kind of work that my colleagues on my left have done, and the work that's underway now about new standards. And because our response back to that agenda at times is complicated, I think it's important to have forums like this where we can acknowledge progress that has been made, but also call out issues that are still there.
Yeah, so that's right. I think for me the major debate here, and you all have touched on it so far, is how we're going to treat e-commerce. You know, the tax code is digital economy. Okay, more broader than even than e-commerce. Thank you. You know, the fundamental of a lot of our tax codes are based on this notion of a permanent establishment. Yeah. So where is the physical, you know, property located, and then we can, you know, adjust. Yeah, the building, the factory, where is something actually being made? I mean, that's really been the basis of the international tax code for years. Okay. Anyway, and you know, now we've got this digital realm, and what does the digital permanent establishment look like? We haven't agreed on that as an international community, and it's a huge debate. There's different ways. I was sort of walking through a couple. The UK has a vision of how to do this. The US has a vision of how to do this. Germany has a vision. Many others have a vision of what this should look like. Australia. So, Minister Donohoe, I'll go back to you. I want to be blunt. A lot of people are accusing Ireland of dragging its feet and not wanting to be involved in this discussion. What is the role of Ireland in defining what a digital permanent establishment looks like?
So I think it's very striking in the debate that's taking place in the European Union on this, the sheer number of countries that share the same view as Ireland on the issue. You had many other finance ministers, particularly as the debate evolved, that actually were then articulating views that were consistent with my own 18 months ago. And I can tell you briefly what we're concerned about, and then I can tell you briefly what we think it needs to move to, because I think you need to know both. Like, what we are very concerned about is any move in international taxation that shifts the tax incidence away from value creation towards consumption. If you're an exporting economy, and if you're a service exporting economy, that poses a gigantic challenge for us. And I have to reserve my right, which I have done, to say, I'm sorry, if a change like that will set a precedent that if you're an exporting economy, will be a real challenge for us. The other grave concern that we had is that we believe with change like this, the safest place to do it is in Angel's organisation. Because if we don't have the engagement of the US, if we don't have the engagement of Japan, if we don't have the engagement of China, I believed we ran a real risk of a tax issue becoming a trade issue. And I don't need to tell this audience of the current trade challenges that we have. So what are we thinking of moving forward to? Firstly, we acknowledge this system needs to evolve and needs to change. Secondly, we believe that this should be treated in a way that is similar to how we organise corporate tax policy at the moment, as have come out of the BEPS process. And thirdly, what we're looking for is balance in recognising that value creation is genuine and does happen within companies, and that the tax incidence should recognise that. It's really complicated, it's very technical, but if you look at the progress that was made in BEPS, many said it wouldn't happen. And it has happened. Yeah. And we all have our part to play in that process now. And
you sort of alluded to this. Is there an approach that you're leaning towards or that you think makes the most sense so far? It sounds like you're not in favor of the UK approach of taxing based on where users or in-face users are.
It'd be fair to say, though, at this point, I think there is... So I think the key issue that we have not yet teased out in the debate is there is an assumption that there is a digital economy here and the rest of the economy over here. Whereas in fact what we have had is an entire economy that has become digitised.
More and more.
Yeah, and I think we still have to figure that out. So that is why the principle that we have for other elements of corporate taxation we will hold in relation to digital taxation, which is you need to be cognizant of where value is created. And my own view is we haven't made enough progress in that yet. And I think where you will see that happen is in the inclusive format work that is now underway, led by Paschal Santaman in the OECD. Yeah. And we'll play our part in that.
Let me just ask him one more question. So the hot topic for...
Well, given this is the first time in my career I've ever been described as a rock star of anything, I do feel I should play my part.
Enjoy it while it lasts.
Because I don't expect that description to ever last for long.
Yeah. All right. I mean, as you well know, the EU proposal for that 3% digital tax failed in the last few weeks. There have been calls, as I'm sure...
Well, that was the sales tax.
Yeah.
This is what he says we're not after it.
Well, what I'm trying to go with this is what your stance is on taking away the unanimity around tax issues in the EU. There are calls that we wouldn't need every country to sign on to a new tax proposal in the European Union. That seems directed somewhat at you and the Nordic countries.
Well, yeah, you see, I think it's very interesting that when this policy is put on the table, the assumption is that the people who will be most concerned about it are countries like my own, and the countries who will be most vocal about it are finance ministers like me. Only one of those assumptions is correct. You're right. In the kind of debate that's underway and has been underway, I have been careful in trying to protect what I believe our national interest is. And I do this as a politician who's completely committed to the European project. But what is also the case is that there are many, many, many other countries within the European Union, small and medium-sized, and indeed some quite big, who would have grave concern, verging on complete opposition, to allowing their ability to set their rate or base be removed from them. Where we have made incredible progress on, and I think, again, still has to be called out, it's the work that has happened on templates and standards, while less clear at times than what's your rate, is having an indelible effect on what our corporate tax landscape is going to be. And I believe that's underestimated in some of the debate that's underway, though of course not here, Heather.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're not in favor of getting rid of unanimity, and you think you're not the only one who feels that way?
Yes, to both.
Would you like to jump in?
No, I don't want to talk about the governance of the EU. I mean, no, it's difficult enough. You know, just now on the sales tax issue. What was the original? Well, not the original, but the French promoted this Euro directive that should have started on the 1st of January this year, which it didn't, and that was a 3%, basically a sales tax. It was a 3% on turnover. It was a 3% on your invoice. Now, why 3%? Well, because it was assumed that 3% on the invoices has something to do with some kind of proxy with the type of profits you could get. Because normally, if you tax the profit at 25 or whatever it is, 12.5 in your case, but the question is that it means that it bears a certain relationship, has to do with what I would call an imputed benefit or profit from a certain size of your invoice. Okay? Now, this is what the British did. They went out there and they got information from third parties. That means everybody who did business with this company, and they say, well, they all tell me they spent so much, and therefore they gave you so much money, and we're going to assume that out of that money you made so much further, and they impute. So it's the imputation of the imputation of the imputation. And that becomes quite, you know, after a while, first of all, it's easy to avoid, and second, it's relatively, it becomes very theoretical, and sometimes it may become unfair. But there is a political imperative here, and that is, people, after the crisis, you still have very high levels of unemployment in a bunch of countries, and you have two issues. One is the man on the street has to pay the taxes, whatever it is, 12.5% or 25% or 30%. Rich people put the money in a tax haven, therefore didn't pay taxes. Companies, small and medium-sized companies, pay taxes. They are constrained by the borders. And then large companies did not pay taxes. The difference between the two cases, the first one was illegal. The second one was legal. Because we built these rules to avoid double taxation. We created the perfect double non-taxation, okay? And therefore, we now have to get back and rewrite the rules. This is a complexity. And this is why everybody's trying now. What everybody has agreed, whether it is France or whether it is the UK or Italy or Spain, whatever, is that the moment there is an OECD deal on the table, then they will start a sunset. And they will roll out their temporary measures, and they will go with the OECD solution. So this is why it's interesting, this is why it's important, and this is why a lot of people are saying we will move in that direction when there is, if and when there is an OECD.
How long do you think it will take to get an OECD?
Oh, we have a very clear timeline, a very clear mandate. 2019, we are going to deliver a relatively detailed or relatively, let's say, complete set of a good compass, a good signaling system, and then we will deliver the final report and start implementation in 2020. But that is the way the G20 mandated us. We're not lagging behind. This is not late. The world, no, I say this is too important to be urgent. You know? So don't trip over yourselves in order not to do it now. But if there is a political imperative, then of course we respect it, but let's make sure that everybody's ready to move forward when there is a deal on the table. And here I like to recognize the presence of the Premier of Bermuda, who is a country, he's gone the extra mile, a lot of political courage precisely in order to align his country to these international best practices.
Let's let Bastian.
What I want to say is that we can already act. You said it's legal. A lot of this stuff is legal, but a lot is not legal if you have a really close look. Look at Apple, look at Nike, where the European Commission is now having a look if their system with Bermuda and Netherlands and other branches is illegal state aid or not. So I think it's very easy to say we have to wait. We have to wait, but we also can act already now. And my call is, aside from that, for more solidarity, especially in the European Union. We're like brothers here. And still, we are losing billions. We are losing billions of taxes that is lacking for better schools, for safer roads, for better education. And when we talk about billions and millions, it's like flowing around, but it's not. You know, the human side is really important for the people out there to understand.
Yeah. I think we have sort of three areas. What we've been discussing a moment ago is, well, we recognize there are harmful processes, but they're legal. And we need to develop principles. Some of them pose challenges. The point you raised, digital economy, there are very different points of attachment. And it gets more immaterial the longer the process goes. If you look at a handy or a cell phone, it starts with a gold mine somewhere, and then you have an element in Silicon Valley, and then ultimately you have somebody who buys it. And the question can be debate, where would you then tax, to what extent in that process? The other point would be the other extreme. That was our main interest, is the clearly illegal. We've been seeing enough of it. I mean, Panama Papers is all over it's all about illegal practices, first of all. Would be good if we can get our hands on them. And then in between, there are forms which are maybe not thoroughly illegal yet, but they're very clear they have only one aim, and that's circumvention. Yeah. And that's where you are with your harmful tax initiatives.
Yeah, if I could just agree with a point that Bastian made there. I mean, you will have expected me to hear me make some of the points that I made earlier on. But as an elected politician, the point that Bastian has touched on there about the need for a social contract in relation to taxation, I think is an essential point. And it is, but in addition to that, the two...
So, okay, I got to jump in there. Some would argue that Ireland's a free rider.
Yeah, and so...
that you're not contributing enough taxation. Germany and others are doing that for you and providing defense and other capabilities in the EU. And how do you sort of say you're doing a fair job?
Yeah, so what I would do is I would point to what we have done over the last number of years, and to say the issues that have been a cause of debate and been a cause of concern, they were recognised, but what I think needs equal recognition is all of the actions that have been taken by myself and my predecessor to respond back to them, while also asserting our right, which we have as a country, to look at how we can be competitive. So we touched on there, for example, in relation to an arrangement that was associated with Malta. Ireland, when we now have put changes in place to make sure that can't happen. I've touched on many of the treaty changes that we have implemented through our finance bills. And in relation to Apple, and let me deal with that head on because it's been touched on by a number of participants here. So within the European Union, we disagree with the assessment that the European Commission made of it, but we have played by the rules in relation to it. We were asked to put in place a process to collect €14 billion. We have done that. All that money has been collected in cooperation with Apple, and we have done it. And the key case that we will be putting forward here is much of the charges that have been levied at us are due to the fact that there was a mismatch between our tax code and the international tax environment. And a huge amount of this has now been addressed by the change that has happened in the American tax code, in particular regarding the repatriation of earnings to America. So, yes, Heather, to take your point, what are we doing in relation to that social contract, both for our citizens or within Europe, It is the changes that we have made, and I'm committed to continuing to do that.
Let's do one more question maybe on the U.S. impact, and then we'll open it up to the floor if anybody has questions in the room, and I bet they will. So the big concern a year ago when the United States lowered its corporate tax was that we were going to start a race to the bottom, where everyone was going to start slashing their taxes, and we were just going to get lower and lower and lower. We're a year on. We haven't really seen that yet, but we have seen some proposals. Mark, is that still a concern of yours, that we might see a race to the bottom in taxation, corporate taxation?
Well, my angle to this is that, you know, small countries are vulnerable. So if we want to squeeze small countries into siding with the general attitude that, for instance, a body like the OECD is developing, they will actually participate. That's what we've been seeing. But the US, of course, is the real free rider. Yeah? I mean, one has to see it that way. Not in an equal way. There are some states that are more a free rider, more of a haven, if you want. But they are the real problem. But, you know, a lot of smaller countries teaming up to tell a bigger one, we've had it now, we want you to join, these are the rules. That's a possibility. I think that's my experience in international work, that you can actually also tell a big guy to yeah.
You want to jump in here?
Yeah, about Bastian's point about the millions and the billions. We have, when I mean we, I mean, we've already counted, we count, the countries receive the money. More than 95 billion euros, which is 110 billion US dollars, simply from taxpayers who are now convinced that their name is going to end up in the taxman's desk if they don't come and declare it first. And they have come in and said, oh, Mr. Paschal, could we, in the hypothetical case that a hypothetical, you know, taxpayer would have, you know, my secretary didn't send a copy to you. My God, the report was missed, you know. So
I should make clear that I have not had this discussion with anybody or with our gal for any fear of misunderstanding.
What can we do? We say, well, I would invite you to, I don't know, change your uniform, one for a striped one like that, you know, something like that. Or so. But basically, 95 billion have, quote unquote, voluntarily come in and paid. Now, this is not the assets. These are the taxes. It represents 10, 15 times more assets that are deposited in there. And now they're coming forward because they are convinced that there's nowhere to hide. So this is happening. Now, we've reviewed 240 preferential tax regimes. Half of them have been amended or abolished. Real progress, really important. Countries have started to exchange information on 16,000 tax rulings. The tax rulings are now mandatory. So the question of transparency has been modified, has been increased exponentially, and we haven't finished yet. And the tax on digital is one remaining issue. But the progress is absolutely, you know, it's undeniable. I'll quote a classic called Mr. Putin, Vladimir Putin, who said when we went to the G20 in St. Petersburg, he said, this is the greatest revolution on the international tax regime in 100 years. Because that's where we launched it, in the St. Petersburg G20.
I'm going to cut you off so we can get some audience time, and then we'll circle back, and maybe you can make some other points. Any questions from the audience? Yep, jump in.
Yes, Pier Giorgio Sandri from L'Avanguardia. A couple of weeks ago, the Spanish government approved two taxes, the digital tax, so-called Google tax, and the so-called Tobin tax on financial operations. What I'm asking is, apparently Spain has decided not to wait, and I would like to ask you if this changed the landscape or the time in the agenda, and if it is a good idea, implement these new taxes alone.
Great, thank you. Do you want one of you two, I feel like
So,
should probably
I made the case earlier on for the ability to set your tax rate being an element of your national economic sovereignty. Therefore, it's only appropriate to recognise Nadia, my colleague in ECOFIN and Eurogroup, for the decision that she has made in relation to the particular rate that you've referred to there. Do I think it will slow down the kind of debate or momentum that's underway within a European or international context? No, I don't. Of course, it is the right of the Spanish government to determine how they want to set a rate or how they want to set a base. And just to refer back to the point that Heather made there in relation to a race to the bottom, very briefly, I will not be reducing our rate. I've absolutely no plans to do it at all. Ireland will not be part of such a trend. And secondly, my judgment is that you will see a movement down in top-line rates, but I don't believe it will be of the magnitude as many are currently indicating.
That's great. Did you have your hand up, or yeah?
No, I'm not a member of the media. I appreciate the opportunity to ask a question, and this would be to you, Minister of Finance. Clearly, a lot of the concern for people in jurisdictions like mine are the new EU economic substance rules, which are now being adopted by the OECD. In your view, and some of the statements which you made, is that you felt that these type of global tax changes should be better done through the OECD as opposed to the European Union. I guess it's a hypothetical question, not asking you to speak for some of your colleagues, but why is it that you think that so many of your other colleagues do not take that same view and do not wish to work through the international system and are trying to unilaterally force it through on an unbalanced way through the EU?
Okay, so the most difficult kind of questions to answer are ones that are hypothetical, and at least you were good enough to acknowledge that it is a hypothetical one. And I'm certainly not in any position, obviously, to speak on behalf of some of my colleagues. I think the reason why there is the kind of momentum that you've just described there is a concern on behalf of some colleagues that it might be very, very, very difficult to make any progress at all on that area internationally. And there's more of an aptitude for trying to do that on a regional level than a global level. And I think that is influencing some of the debate you're seeing at the moment.
Do you want to, yeah.
They all want to work with us, Prime Minister. I don't think the point is that they would say, I'd rather work outside of the OECD. No. The question is the OECD has a certain process where it takes time to do multilateral issues. Unilateral takes one leader, one Congress, and you got a tax. Well, sometimes it's very difficult to get one leader and one Congress agree on whatever. It's just, but the point here is we understand the political imperative. I mean, we understand why Bruno Le Maire or why the Italian Giovanni Tria or why Nadia Calvino are saying, let's tax the digital. Because we need to tax the digital. The only question is, we haven't taxed the digital for a long, long time. And therefore, perhaps putting it together, doing it very, carefully, prudently, but having a broad-based agreement. Why? Because if you do not have, this is like the automatic exchange of information, which you have been so important in, practicing in Bermuda, but also leading the church. If you do not have everybody in the game, then you just go to the country next door. Yeah. This is like corruption, Mr. Pieth. Huh? He is the big anti-corruption czar of Lord, whatever it is, But the question is, and if you do not have everybody playing by the same rules, now it does not necessarily have to be the same tax rates, but certainly the rules have to be the same. Otherwise you can go. But Google tax, please, the Google tax, any country, as long as they are ready, as Italy and Spain have been, to say, okay, I'll remove it the moment there's an OECD deal. And last but not least, the Tobin tax. It's a very old tax. Many countries have practiced it, and they all say it's temporary. And nothing more permanent than a temporary tax. So beware.
And maybe it's not a bad idea if some go ahead, and give a start and show that it's practicable and then follow the OECD when it comes. I think it's a better sign than everyone holding back and saying, oh, there's no international regulation there.
Also, you learn about, trial and error.
Yes.
I think, though, we should, from the point of view of Europe, as a part of the world that is a net exporter to the rest of the world, I think we should take great care about establishing tax policy in a way that's perceived to be targeting particular companies. Europe is about designing tax policies for an economy or for part of an economy. And I think this is something that we need to be aware of in the global debate.
All right, one more question. The back was firsthand. So.
Hello, Stephen Carroll from France 24. I spoke to Bruno Le Maire a couple of hours ago and I asked him, did he expect there would be an EU agreement? He told me that he was, he thought that he would be able to convince the 4 EU countries that haven't signed up to the digital tax, so consider yourself warned, Minister. He said that himself with his German counterparts will be doing everything they can to convince you. Will they be able to do it by the end of March, as Bruno Le Maire says?
Okay, well, I had the opportunity to meet my good colleague Bruno earlier on today, and both of us look forward to meeting maybe in Dublin or in Paris kind of in the coming weeks. Bruno's already offered to buy me a beer in relation to all of this, as you may well know.
Deals are done.
But I think it is fair to say, and this won't surprise Bruno, that the concerns that we have in relation to this, are of a very, very principled level. What does it mean for future tax policy for exporting countries if you shift taxation to where consumption happens? And that transcends even the debate that we're having about the digital economy. And there are quite a few countries within the European Union that have that concern. So we will continue to be active and constructive in the debate, but I think there are economy-wide implications of that approach that will continue to become apparent in the debate that's going to unfold on it.
I think that's all the time that we have. Thank you all for your insights and thanks for the great questions.
And please, everything you always wanted to know about the digital tax is public. It's in our website. And this is the document we released in last March. Okay? March a year ago. This is the one we just delivered to the G20 heads in Argentina. And there's a lot of progress. Here, it was all about Why we don't agree on anything. And this one is a convergence story. And this is within the same year. Not bad. Eh?
Very good. Very good.